If you don't know me, my name is Mitchell Forgie. I own Redbeard here. We also have a speakeasy in the basement called Nigel's. I'm a partner at Bright Eye Brewing down the street. And then I am participating in a commercial property on the North Shore. So my levy helps pay the BIA. I've lived in the neighborhood for quite a while now. I can't remember how long. On the North Shore, at least 6 or 7 years, and Redbeard here started in October of 2012. So, we've been very interested in what the North Shore is doing, participating, and as an owner operator myself, you can see me here doing dishes all the time. I care about this neighborhood and I care about what's going on. So that's what brings me here. All right, so into the presentation itself. So just a quick note about the pictures I've used. I've primarily used pictures of infill housing in Edmonton, partly because Edmonton is absolutely the furthest ahead city in sort of distributing, building out infill housing to the point that it was like the #1 election issue in their recent election. So I also think it's nicer to pick on projects and houses that are not people that are in this room or your, friend or family member or whatever. And so it's easier then to try to keep it out of it. However, there are a few projects in there or pictures of houses in there. So I hope if it's in there, no one takes any offense, but I'm trying to do my best to sort of put together a little presentation for everybody. So the first question I'm going to answer is, what is infill? Infill specifically is when you see an older neighborhood like this one here in Edmonton. You can see a lot of houses that were built in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, very similar to our own neighborhood. And they are now getting new houses put in them. I would describe infill as the turnover of an older neighborhood. It's when an older neighborhood has houses that for various kinds of reasons are ready to be torn down and replaced, and what's going to come after. You can see here in the city's housing needs report that was put together in 2024 that in the city of Kamloops and the TNRD as well, 10% of all housing is 1960 before, and another 40% is 1961 to 1980. So as much as this is a MacDonald Park issue because we are one of the older neighborhoods in the city, it is a citywide Kamloops issue very, very soon. When you have half of the city's housing stock pushing 50 plus years, you have all kinds of things that are going to happen. Fires, houses are going to burn down, they get into disrepair, they get rented out and bought by investors, and they, become worse. And so you can see that half of the city is going to be replaced in the next sort of 20, 30 years. And so all of these things that we're talking about now are things that are going to affect the whole city very soon. What is missing middle? Missing middle is another thing that gets thrown around as a word a lot. Missing middle is, I would describe, generally affordable family-sized units. I don't think that infill or missing middle is necessarily used in the media or in Facebook comments or in council meetings or in staff planning meetings with those definitions. But I want to use those definitions because I think that they're going to help us understand what we're talking about when we're talking about small infill here in Kamloops. This is where I used to live, just down the street, built by a local guy who lives in this neighborhood. His name's Josh, Parm and Jazz, the three of them. I lived in one of these units here, a 1-bedroom at the station. It's just above Bright Eye, fantastic place to live. Highly recommend living there. This is not missing middle. What's important to realize is that there was two bedrooms in this whole building. Everything else is 1-bedrooms and micro suites. They have a demographic that they're serving. I was that demographic. But this is not family-sized housing, and it's not going to be family-sized housing, as we will get into very shortly. You can find pictures like this in all kinds of different planning diagrams, but you can see this is missing middle. So you can see here, single-family houses, and then you have everything from a carriage house, which I myself am about to break ground on building a carriage house for my in-laws very soon, to cottages. You don't see these much here in Oregon. You see them all the time where you see like a big 100 by 100 foot lot and there's like 6 or 8 little cottages. That said, there is a cottage court across the alley from me over on King Street where there is a big lot that has 4 little houses on it. You have duplexes, townhomes, stacked flats. This is a really common building typology in Quebec. They call them triplexes in Montreal. The manor house, which in Canada, or at least in BC, has become illegal. But I think it's actually a fantastic way to live. They were also known as rooming houses. So you'd have one person who owned the house, maybe have 10 bedrooms. Typically you'd have like the landlady. If you ever watched Murdoch Mysteries, Mrs. Kitchen, you know, she's cooking for the people who live here. And this is a fantastic building typology for young singles who are just getting into the market, or for people who are perhaps widowed or retired and looking for a communal place to live. But we're not going to talk about them, but these don't exist anymore. And then you have everything from a single lot walk-up apartment building, which is different than these big, large multi-block buildings. So missing middle. How does a property have value? Your property it's your house and it's your land. And what's important to understand is that the land is what's appreciating. Your house is a depreciating asset. It's just like your car. It needs to get fixed, needs a new roof, needs a new hot water tank. I picked on this picture. This is in our neighborhood because I happened to be walking by and this fellow was painting his house, working on fixing it up, keeping it going. This is probably about an 80, 90-year-old house. It needs a lot of work. What makes the land in a house like MacDonald Park valuable? Why is the land here valuable? And the answer to that is because it's near the center of the city. As the city goes out and out and out and continues to go out and out and out, and you think about it as a circle, if you're at the center of the circle, you have access close to home to the most amenities and the most number of jobs. If you live in Barnhart Vale and you want to figure out what jobs are available to you in a 15-minute commute, and it doesn't matter how you commute, walking, biking, driving, carpooling, whatever, cartwheeling. In Barnhart Vale, you have far fewer jobs available to you in that 15, 20-minute commute than you do by living in the center of the city. And that is what drives demand for central properties. And that's why they keep appreciating. The bigger our city becomes, the more rare a lot in the center of the city becomes as a percentage of the total housing stock. You can see that reflected in your property tax information. So most people have probably seen one of these before. You get emailed this or mailed it when you got to go pay your property tax, and then you find out what your property is worth. And you can see that you have a land value, you have an improvement value, that's the value of your house, for a total amount, and then that's what you get taxed on, right? You can see here, these are both North Shore. I've left where they are out, but you can guess from the land, the improvement, and the $1.2 million house that this is on Royal Avenue on the riverside, right? Who wants to pay for a $1.2 million house in MacDonald Park? Someone who's got access to the river. This is actually my house. $332,000 for the land, $159,000 for the house. I gotta say, I don't think it's worth $159,000. But we bought it. This is actually the year we bought it. We bought it for $485,000. And so they know the market information for that time. And then they use that information to calculate what your land is worth, what your property is worth. That's how they generate your tax assessment. This is what I would call a healthy tax assessment. If you're looking at it from the eyes of the community, from the eyes of the city council, from the eyes of property taxation, the improvement outweighs the land by a multiple. You want to have situations where whatever's on the land is worth more than the land itself. It doesn't really matter that much what's on it as long as it's worth more. As this starts to happen, that's the house depreciating out. That's seeing that the house is getting to the end of its life. And the second part, one of the big things that nobody ever talks about when they talk about these discussions about infill, when they talk about zoning, is that before you ever get to the city council office to ask for a zoning permit, you first have to get financing. And what do you have to do before you get financing? You have to have a property you can insure. So it goes insurance, and they get the biggest number one say. It goes banking, number two, zoning, number three. So if I take my lot and I go to the bank and I say, guys, I know I bought this house for $485,000 last year. What I'd like to do is tear down the house and build another house on it. It's going to cost me $350,000 to build a house. then I will have a house that's worth 500 grand at the end. They won't finance that. Why would they do that? They're going to give me financing to spend $700,000-800,000 on building a new house when at the end it's only going to be worth 500,000. So what happens is it gets replaced by either a luxury house, and to be a luxury house, it has to command a price of a luxury house. If you live on Royal Ave against the river, it commands that price. If you live on my little street in MacDonald Park, no one's buying a $1.2 million house on my street. Or you get multiple units. You get a situation where you're dividing that land cost by multiple doors, and then you're getting either a 4-plex, a 3-plex, a 6-plex, whatever it is, and whatever the sort of market is demanding. Or you get, for example, in MacDonald Park, this vacant lot. And you'll see vacant lots all over the place, and what you're looking at is a situation where there is not a financeable project on that lot, now that the house has been torn down, that also meets insurance, financeability, and zoning. This is the part where zoning really comes in. This guy needs to have a big setback on all 4 sides of a very small lot. By zoning, the biggest house you can build on this lot is a 900 square foot single family house. You're not going to get a financing on that project. You're not going to get insurance on a project. You're not going to get it zoned. So you end up with a vacant lot. And why can't I build a single family home is because you have this as your competition. This is Orchards Walk. It's one of my favorite places to pick on because it's one of those suburbs that are called after the thing that used to be there. You used to have an orchard and you used to be able to go walking there, and now you can't have an orchard or go walking there. And this is Pine View. And so you can see like these townhouses, this is a couple summers ago, $364,000. Are you going to go live in a absolutely brand new house up in Pine View for 360 grand? Or are you going to spend 600 grand on a house that's old and 80 years old in MacDonald Park? And that's where the infill stuff really comes in. Just illustrating that point one more time, seeing the healthy improvement. This is a building on Trunkiel Road. This is one that was torn down a couple years ago, and you can see that the property was bought for about 900 grand. Then they put a $7 million apartment building on it. Again, great investment. The financing makes sense. And this was the normal way of things until about the late 80s. You can see in this overhead shot of our neighborhood right here in MacDonald Park, you know, we've got a 50-year-old 4-plex right here. We've got walk-up townhouses. We actually have a manor house right in here. We've got walk-up apartment buildings. We got trailers. We got people who built some larger luxury houses and put in pools. You're getting like the whole gamut of different kinds of houses. And we achieved this turnover without any zoning rules. You know, we didn't have zoning rules when this neighborhood was built out. But now that we've overlaid new zoning rules on them, you can see that there's been almost no new construction since the early 2000s, except in those unique, very financeable, very profitable projects. So what does it cost to build a house? When we talk about a building costs, you know, we want affordable housing. Here's the duplex in our neighborhood, stick framed. Someone's got to pay for the materials, right? You got to buy the 2x4s, you got to buy the concrete, you got to put in the landscaping, you got to put on the roof. You got to have the guys to do it. You got to pay the trades folks that go out here to build the house. So if you're frustrated with the affordability of homes and you look at the building cost of this house, I ask you, who should get paid less? We can't find carpenters. Carpenters are all busy, you know. Are we going to pay them less and hope they still work? Probably not. Same with plumbers, same with electricians. Do we want to get rid of the insurance and building inspectors? Not really. Now you can't get a mortgage on your house because it's not insurable. So who do you really want to cut out of that equation? And even if you did, like, what are we talking about? 2%, 3% reduction in costs? So the house cost is fairly fixed. And the cost of the house increases as the size increases. That makes sense, right? If you're going to build a 1,500 square foot house, it's going to cost more than a 1,000 square foot house. And so when people are costing a house, what they do is they cost it as per square foot. You could talk to some different trades folks, ask them what you think they are costing houses at right now. Some are 250, some are 280, some are 300. The point is, whatever their cost is, the cost is per square foot. Another thing to understand is that as the building gets larger and more complex, the cost per square foot goes up, right? That makes intuitive sense. When you build a bigger building, it's got hallways. Those are going to take away from your saleable square feet. It's got stairways. Those take away from your saleable square feet. You need more engineers. You need more sophisticated architecture. You need bigger construction firms that have turnover of staff, that have middle managers, that have a management structure. The complexity just keeps going up and up and up. And as a result, there's a great example of non-saleable square feet. You have to build them anyway, right? You're going to build that apartment building. You build this, costs you money to build, but you don't get to sell it. Another example, this is at the station as well. This is a rooftop amenity space that's required by zoning. You can see the plants are dead. There's no amenity happening, but that's a non-saleable square foot that had to get built, right? As you can see, as you go higher, these are, by the way, very rough numbers. This is not like a tried and true cost, but what's important here is that curve goes up. The bigger, more complex the project, the more dollars per square foot it costs to build. The other big cost is your land. I have some examples of some bare lots. Land gets developed in exactly the same way that a building gets developed. Someone buys a big chunk of land. They hire a bunch of lawyers to divide it up into parcels that they can sell. And this is a very important thing when we're talking about the North Shore. When a developer goes into Juniper, the developer builds that road. The city doesn't build the road. The developer builds the road. The developer builds the sidewalk. The developer puts in the streetlights. The developer puts in all of those community amenities. They build the retaining walls. They do all the geotech. They do all of that complex stuff. And then that goes into the price of what a lot has to sell for. And as you can see in Kamloops, to have a viable lot to sell, we are talking about $450,000 for a single lot in Kamloops. That's the baseline land cost that we're looking at. And if it was cheaper than that, guys like Makura up in Kenna would be developing lots like crazy. But they're not, because this is what it costs them to make a lot in Kamloops right now, between silt bluffs, between geotech issues, between drainages, and on and on. So the same thing happens on the North Shore. So we've got an older house, it's time to replace it. We've talked about it, it's a depreciating asset, right? The house has got to the end of its life. There's all kinds of reasons why the house has got to the end of its life. Everyone has seen an aging parent who's stuck at home, who hasn't done maintenance in 20 years, or the kitchen hasn't been updated in 20 years, and you have to redo the bathrooms, you have to redo everything in order to make that house saleable or rentable. So this is what a lot costs on the North Shore. So you buy a house that's ready to be torn down, you get ready to tear it down, still gonna cost like another $100,000. So what happens with the land cost is when you go to sell that house, it needs to either become, like we said earlier, a luxury house, a multi-unit house, or a bare lot. This duplex, just 2 blocks from here, is a great example of someone bought this piece of land for $600,000. They divided it into duplex, so it's land cost $300,000 per side, right? That's what each lot cost. It's a 1,500 square foot build at about $300 a square foot. So we were looking at $450,000 to build it. So that each side cost this guy $750,000 to build. They put it on the market for $850,000. It sat there for 3 years. It didn't sell. The project went bankrupt, and it's now in court-ordered sale. Makes sense, right? The math makes sense. What happens is when we look at projects like this, people say, oh, the greedy developer wants to sell each half for $850,000. That's an unrealistic amount for this house. Of course it's an unrealistic amount for this house. You could buy 2 townhouses just like it in Pineview for the same price. You're not going to do that. So as we can see, the land cost, $600,000 divided by 2, 280, divided by 4, divided by 8, divided by 16, and on it goes. By the time you get to something like 64 units, basically the price of the land that you're buying is almost irrelevant. You know, if you got $100,000 off or $100,000 more on the price of the lot, it wouldn't matter that much. You're dividing it by so many times that now what matters is the cost of the building. And so you get this curve where the land cost comes down, the building cost goes up, and the combined cost does this U-shaped curve. And in Canada and the United States, for the last 40 years, we allow this, and we allow this, and we've made this illegal. And that's why people call missing middle. That's the missing middle. That's the low density residential neighborhood intensification of building up. And you can see in places that didn't change their laws around it, like France, that whether you're in the center of Paris or you're in this very small rural village in France, they end up looking just about the same because they are pushing towards the bottom of that curve. The increased cost of the capital and the risk to build a really, really high building is not attractive to developers. At the same time is the land cost of a single unit is way too expensive. And so the curve is always pushing down to the center. And that's why Paris and France looks like that. This is St. John's, Newfoundland. You can see the same thing. It pushed towards 2 to 3 stories, and you go all over the St. John's that was built before 1980. It all looks like this, all of it. Nobody built any high buildings until like the 90s, 2000s, and then they only built like 2, and they're like, that was a terrible idea. This is Zurich, same thing, 4 stories. This is Mexico City, same thing. This is La Condesa. This is like the center of Mexico City, a city of 23 million people. There's almost no land use regulations. You could build a 50-story building here if you wanted to. They don't, because the economics pushes down towards that center. Rajasthan, India, same thing. You don't have to be in the like westernized world to experience exactly the same building structure. Everybody pushes for 2, 3, 4 stories. Again, I can tell you from my experiences in India, they can build anything they want. They choose not to because this is where the economics pushes. A huge myth that we have in the way we talk about ourselves as Canadians is that the reason why they do it in all these other old places is because they are so old, right? They're really old cultures. They've been around for a long time. This is Nuremberg. Nuremberg was bombed flat in the 50s. Dresden was bombed flat in the 50s. East London was bombed flat in the 50s. Huge swath. What I should say is it was bombed flat in the 40s. It was still flat in the 50s. They rebuilt, and they built back the same way we have. In 1979, we were still knocking down what we had built. We had downtown in Kamloops that looked just like that. We had a Tranquil corridor that looked just like that. We knocked it down. And because we have such troubling renovation rules, the few buildings we have left, they're sitting empty, they're decaying, they're getting worse every day, and very soon they're going to be like that depreciating asset. We're going to knock them down because we're not going to keep them around. So here we are, myth number 1, Europe and Asia is old, we are young, we have no heritage. That's not true. Myth number 2, no one is buying a cute house like this one over here on, I think this is Poplar, to turn this into a 6-plex. This is like an 80-year-old house that is gorgeous. You can tell whoever has lived there has kept this place up. The person who's competing to buy this house when it goes on for sale for 550 grand is the question they're asking themselves is not, do I like this house? Of course they do. What they're considering is, do they want to live in a brand new maintenance-free, quote, house in Valley View or Sun Rivers or Pineview? Or do I want to live in this central neighborhood in a 100-year-old house? But this is a great house. They're going to live in it. A developer wants to bid that price down. They want to find a crap house. They don't want to find a really nice house that's going to hurt to take down. And the second part is that an investor looking at a house like this or a house similar to it, especially if it's a little bit more tired, is going to make money by renting this house out rather than tearing it down and building a 4-plex, which gets us to when you're thinking about the cost of housing and it's too high, what we have is a situation where single-family homes are being turned into illegal apartment buildings. An investor can come in and rent out a 4-bedroom house by the bedroom. You got 6 people in there, they're each paying $500 a month, $3,000 a month qualifies you for a $750,000 mortgage. So that investor can pay 750 grand for that 4-bedroom house that a family might want to live in, and they're going to make more money renting it out by the bedroom So therefore, when you think about that apartment building that's replacing it, or apartment building that's coming onto Tranquille, if they can get an apartment and build one profitably for $600, $700, $800, $900 a month, a cost competitive price to that per bedroom cost that an investor is looking at a single family home, who is going to choose to live in a house with 6 roommates, sharing a bathroom, sharing a kitchen, having a bedroom door that doesn't lock, when instead you could have your own apartment where when you clean the toilet, it's still clean when you get back. When you put food in the fridge, it's still there when you get back. And when I think about kids that are going off to school and they're going off to some city that you've never been in, and they're sleeping in an unlocked bedroom when they've got strangers coming in and out of the house in a 6 roommate situation, I would much rather live in my own 1-bedroom apartment. So we're going to come back to that a little bit. I also want to address myth number 4, which is that plexes, 4 plexes, 6 plexes are an increase in population density. That is usually not true. The house I live in, the guy who owned it had 5 kids and a live-in grandparent. There was 8 people who were in my house 30 years ago. There's now 2, me and my wife. My neighbor raised his 5 kids in it. He's now living there by himself. He is whatever age he is. House hasn't been kept up for 25 years. When that house goes for sale, it is going to go to a developer to redevelop. There's no question about it. But the population density of this neighborhood used to be much, much, much higher, and it shows in the commercial. It used to be chock-a-block down here, right? The Keg was here. There was multiple bars when the city was a third the size it is now, and it supported a much more robust commercial corridor because the population density then was much higher than it is now. And so when we say we want to preserve the character of the neighborhood, this was a family neighborhood. This is where a lot of people raised their families, where you had living grandparents, where you had a generational housing situation. And now when people are buying these houses, they are no longer occupied in the same population density. And so here's just a little drawing that gives you an idea of, here's the investor buying the house, renting it out by the bedroom, everyone's sharing a kitchen. You build the micro suite apartment building over here on Tranquille. They have cost competitive rent. They move out. Everybody gets their own unit. So it doesn't mean that these buildings aren't way bigger. It doesn't mean that there could be a slight increase in population density, but it doesn't always mean that there's suddenly wildly more people than there used to. And you can see, this is StatsCan from the city's housing needs report, that most households in Kamloops, almost 60% are 2 or 1 person households. There's all kinds of things that are leading into that. The official number is 2.3 people per house, according to StatsCan. And then Rennie Construction, which is a consultancy based out of Vancouver that comes up and does presentations every year to the home builders, they think that the real number is closer to 1.9. In both cases, it's declining. There's all kinds of reasons: separated families, blended families, people aging at home, people not having kids. There's lots of reasons why that's declining. But when we say things like nobody wants to live in a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment, we're thinking of ourselves almost always as a family, usually a straight family, with 2 kids, and those kids are between the ages of 5 and 10. Because we don't think about toddlers when we talk about this. We don't think about teenagers, certainly not. The teenagers that want to get around, go to the parties, meet up with their friends, get to the skate park. We ignore them too. We imagine that every person has kids between 5 and 10 that are in activities, that are going to hockey, that are going to Costco. We don't think about the vast majority of people that are 1 and 2 person households. Another myth I want to address, I'm going to call it the myth of catastrophic change. So if we say, let's say city council passed tomorrow that every property in our city could be an apartment building tomorrow, what would happen? Very little. We have 20,275 homes in Kamloops. Last year, or 2023, we issued 352 building permits. I think I wrote down the number. I didn't. You don't need to do the math that quickly. 325 into 20,000. You know, it's not going to happen very fast. If the average is between 350 to 540 housing starts a year over the last 20 years, it will take 44 years just to replace the houses that we already have in our city. which, if you think about this neighborhood in 44 years, a lot of more houses are going to need to be replaced faster than 44 years. Another myth that everybody worries about is traffic. What happens when suddenly there's a whole bunch of sixplexes or fourplexes on my street? What's the traffic going to be like? Well, first of all, if we're already having investor, illegal, single family, renting by the bedroom situations where you have 6, 8, 10 people in a single family house, the situation's the same. You know, I can go down any street in here and see a house with a single person living in it with 10 cars out front. I also know, example, we're building the Carriage House for Ed and his parents and myself. There's gonna be 4 people living there and one of us has a driver's license and we have 1 car. Yes, traffic is always going to get worse, 100%, especially right here in the center of the city. You know, as we said earlier, where by living in the center, you're closest to all the jobs, all the amenities. That's because all the jobs and amenities are here. So not only do more people want to live here, but also more people are going to commute into these neighborhoods. And it's only a situation of intelligent response to that problem. But you must accept that it's worse. And I often always say is congestion is a sign of success. If we had no congestion, I can think of a few communities in rural British Columbia like that if they have no congestion, there's no jobs, there's no housing value, people don't live there, they move away and they become ghost towns. Congestion is what happens when the economy is doing what it's supposed to do and people are becoming successful and they're moving closer. So we'll come back to that though. A final thing is, this is Midtown Manhattan. If you've ever been there and you walk down any side street that's not a commercial street, but instead a residential street, the streets are quiet. There's barely a car that goes down it. There's only a handful of people because residential neighborhoods are inherently places where people leave once a day and they come back once a day. Otherwise, there's not much going on. So even at the highest population densities that we have on our continent, there is a huge traffic jam here for an hour and a half in the morning, and there's a huge traffic jam here for an hour and a half at night, and you put it on either side, nothing's happening. And so Kamloops is not the first place, as you can see, to get more dense. We have thousands, tens of thousands of communities that have tried all sorts of things to mitigate all of those different challenges that comes with growth. And we'll just start doing them. The moral of the story there is that we are not the first people to walk this path, and there's lots to learn from, lots to see. What does happen when new infill gets built? We're back to looking at a picture of Edmonton. This is across the street from my mom. You can see that the developer put in sidewalks. Remember when we talked about wanting sidewalks in our neighborhood? I think it was the #1 thing in our 2004 MacDonald Park Neighbourhood Plan. Peter could probably attest to that. We want sidewalks and we want street lighting, but the city is not going to put those in. I think it's the next slide. No. The city has $1 billion of unfunded maintenance projects just to maintain what they already have. The city's not going to suddenly put in, when they did Oak up here and they put in a sidewalk a couple of years ago, that was $450,000 for 400 meters of road. There's 400 kilometers of road just on the North Shore. If we wait for the city to put in sidewalks, it's never going to happen. If we wait for the city to put in streetlights, it's never going to happen. Who pays for that stuff? Is the developers, is the investors. They pay it as part of their requirement when they go in to put zoning in. When Rick brings up infrastructure, how does that infrastructure get built? It gets financed by the developer. It gets financed by telling the developer that you want to put 6 units here. In this case, this is actually, I think, 12 because they have basement suites. The developer puts that in. And they also pay something called the DCC, or development cost charge. Depends on the unit. Usually it's $4,000 a unit, $6,000 a unit, depends. That money goes in to paying for community amenities. So let's say you have a street that half of the houses have now turned over into infill. The city has a bank called the DCC bank, and now you can go in and you can say, hey, look, half these properties got done. Time for the city to take some of that developer money, and it's time to finish the sidewalk. Thompson Landing, which is built down on Royal Avenue, you can see when you go by, everyone complains about the weird bulb out. That's because the city has put in the bulb out already for the bike lane that's going to go there and connect to the end in the future. The bike lane's not there now. The bike lane will be there when a handful more buildings get built out, and they will get to be a critical mass where suddenly it makes sense to go all the way. This drawing was done in 2004 as part of the city planning process. I think there was 1,200 people who came to the various city planning meetings at that time to create what's called the MacDonald Park Neighbourhood Plan. Everybody there said, yeah, well, not everybody. Obviously, there was dissenting opinion. People have lots of different opinions. But the consensus of the planners and the people participating in those design charrettes at the time said, we want to have sensitive infill. We want to see our back alleys cleaned up. We want to see our neighborhood improved. We want to see this type of development. One laneway house was built between 2004 and 2020. So what happened was we didn't allow for the market to do what it needs to do, right? We didn't allow for developers to have a financeable and insurable project in our neighborhood that would allow them to build it out. The laneway house that was built, the guy's a draftsman. He works at a engineering firm in town, and he built it for his mom. I got into building some carriage houses in Kamloops in 2010, something like that. We built 3 in total when we were trying to get this done. All 3 of them were built for family members. They were not built for investment. They weren't built for rentals. And the reason is it made no financial sense. You're trying to compete with why would we spend 400 grand building a carriage house when they can buy a brand new house for 400 grand somewhere else? So the carriage house model now works, but it only works because the land price has gone so high that we can't afford, myself or Edna's parents, to live in this neighborhood unless we pool our resources. And so that's a family situation where you now have 2 houses in the lot and they're both owner occupied. If you want this spreadsheet, email me. I love to distribute this spreadsheet far and wide. It means that anybody in this room can play with the numbers. Any city councilor, any city planner, anyone who wants to think to get into developing. You think you want to develop a 4-plex? Let's look at what it would cost. 500 grand. Unit count, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. You can see the cost per unit of the land cost coming down. You can see it $285, which is what I'm budgeting for my carriage house. At a 1,400 square foot, 4-bedroom family-sized unit, we say we want family-sized units in town. We want families. We want to attract them to this neighborhood. It's going to cost 424 grand in hard building costs to build. And then you can see the total building cost. So you can see if we were to build a duplex, the total building cost is going to be 674 grand aside. By the time you get to an 8-plex, you're down to 480 grand. This is a complicated number. This is called floor area ratio, or FAR. Unless you work in the industry, you've probably not come across it before. But basically, it's a number that city planners use to calculate how big a house or a building can be on a lot. And it's a function of how big the lot is versus how big the building is. So it's a really straightforward calculation. You can see a floor area ratio of 0.5 on a 6,000 square foot lot for a 3,000 square foot unit, right? You build a 3,000 square foot house on a 6,000 square foot lot, it's 0.5. Here you can see the floor area ratio is coming across. And then you can see at a 6-plex with current zoning, assuming that you have a perfect lot with no hydro poles, or you're not on a corner, or you don't have a setback, you are already over the floor area ratio that the city allows at a 6-plex. So even when the city says, or the province came in and said, okay, you can build a 4-plex on any lot, by the time you try to put a driveway in and a parking stall and a tree, and you fit in the landscaping requirement and all that, basically you start to already struggle to build a 4-plex. It's been further made more difficult in the North Shore because now with the floodplain issue, which is a very reasonable issue, the house now has to be almost 2 meters off the ground with no basement. So where a house up in Sahali, you might buy a house, put in a basement suite as a mortgage helper, and now you can afford your $700,000 mortgage. That's not an option on the North Shore. So unless you can pay that 700 grand for the house, you're just not going to be living in the house. So anybody who wants a spreadsheet, just email me, mitchforgie@gmail.com. I'm easy to find. And you can play around with the numbers. You can play around with your construction cost, your unit size, and see sort of what you think might be viable. The last thing I want to talk about here is cash up front. So a lot of people don't think about this with developers. Typically, you need to have 25% cash up front. Usually it ends up being more before a bank will finance a project. And so you can see at a duplex, your total building cost to build that duplex is 850 grand. You need 212 grand in the bank. That is $212,000 in cash to build a duplex. You're going to spend a year building that duplex, hope the market doesn't change, and hope you can sell the 2 units. By the time we get to a 6-plex, we're talking about a $2.5 million project. We're talking about 630 grand up front. You get to a 10-plex, you're talking about $1 million in cash up front. How many people in this room have $1 million in cash right now to develop a 10-plex? Not very many people. So this is what we worry about when we talk about is the neighborhood suddenly going to get run over by 10-plexes? No. A cautionary tale. I think this was this council. I can't remember. Might have been last council. On 9th Avenue downtown, Moranti is building a 15-unit apartment building on 2 lots. So it's 100 by 100. I want to say it was about 2016, a different person owned those 2 lots, and they brought forward a proposal to have 2 duplexes in the front, each with basement suites, and 2 carriage houses in the back. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10. Basically a 10-plex, right? Got turned down by council because the neighborhood came out opposed to it because it was too intense, too many units, too much. What happens is the guy who bought that house waited for the value of the land to rise. Then he sold it on to a new developer. The new developer paid $1.5 million for that lot, which is Moranti, and they come to council asking for 15 units. Now the neighborhood really is unhappy. Quote from that public hearing, someone opposed to this project in the neighborhood said, well, why couldn't we get some duplexes with carriage suites? Well, the guy who had bought those original lots paid 450 grand for the whole lot. He could make that a financeable, insurable product at 450 grand. Now he needs 15 units. If you turn him down, what's the next project that's going to come to council look like? 25 units, 30 units? And the biggest thing is that the developers very rarely have risk in this game because the land value, as we know, will continue to rise. So they might have to bridge it for a couple years, but they have no risk in this game. Their risk is once they actually start building. So every project in a neighborhood that you say, we don't want this, all you are doing is delaying until you do have a catastrophic change problem. You know, like this is going to change that neighborhood, and projects like that are going to change that neighborhood. In the east end of downtown, which we all want to preserve, the really pretty little heritage houses that were down there, what's going to happen is, as we saw in that land cost diagram, as the number of units needed to make that a viable project rises, the land cost itself becomes less important in the cost of the total project. So that's where you start to see catastrophic money and catastrophic developers and out-of-town developers starting to look at projects like this, is because they want to buy 5 houses in a row and knock it down. And so we may have preserved those heritage houses for 10 years or 15 years, but we've done it at the expense of, we might have seen small incremental change over 20, 30 years, and now we're going to see catastrophic change. 20 years from now, the east end of downtown will probably be unrecognizable, just like the north end of Kelowna is. If you are downtown Kelowna and you drive north, all of that used to be single family homes is all 6 stories now. Same thing will happen. So this is, I just wanted to bring this up because it's one of my favorite things. It's a little bit dated, 2004 MacDonald Park Neighbourhood Plan. You can see that the city made a semi-commitment at the time, 22 years ago, that they were going to improve the lighting in the neighborhood. As we know, hasn't happened. You can also see that they want some security lights around the MacDonald Park pool. Oh, those were good times. You can see it didn't happen, but one of my favorite things in the slide is actually because of prostitution was the reason for it. The internet has changed all that. But I just wanted to include that for fun. I was going to leave this as the last thing. I brought it up earlier. Kamloops has $1 billion in maintenance bills that are unfunded before anything new that the city is building. I wrote a book in 2012 where I took every house in a cul-de-sac. I did it in 5 different cul-de-sacs throughout the city. I took the total amount of money that the city collects from each one of those properties in a year, and I did the math on when they repave that street, assuming that they took all the property tax from that entire street and devoted it only to repaving the street, it would take 17 years to pay for repaving the street. People have known this is coming. Edmonton doesn't have to do infill. Edmonton has farmers' fields that are cheap as far as the eye can see. They don't have to do infill. They're choosing to do infill because of their unfunded maintenance liabilities. And lots of cities are doing that, lots of prairie cities, and in all different states and countries. Kamloops, we're hemmed in. We already have geographic barriers that are forcing this, as we saw in the land cost. A single lot costs $400,000 to develop now. The city's not going to be the ones that are going to bail us out. What we need is a productive conversation with developers, with planners, so that we can actually guide development into something that's profitable to build, what people want to live in, and also, you know, delivers to our neighborhood some of the things that we've been asking for, like lighting, like sidewalks, etc. So that's it. And thank you all for coming. And we're going to do a question and answer. I see a hand, Chris.